Welcome back to Let's Make a Game. In this episode, I would like to review another gamebook, which I found on archive.org. The gamebook that I'll be reviewing is Lords of Doom by Douglas Niles from 1986. As a side note, I should say that I didn't find it on the Gamebooks collection page, which I've used before several times. I found it on a different page. Unfortunately, it's not in the Gamebooks collection, but I'll put a link to where it is in the description of this video. Please note that it has 8 different gamebooks scanned, but you can't download them one at a time. You have to download a zip file with all 8 in them. So, back in the 1980s, Dungeons and Dragons was owned by TSR, and one of the spin-offs that TSR did was a series called Endless Quest. That was a series of choose-your-own-adventure books set in mostly the Dungeons and Dragons setting, although some of them were set in the worlds of other role-playing games that TSR had, such as Gamma World and Top Secret. But they didn't have any game system. They were just like the Choose Your Own Adventure books, in that you would get a choice, turn to the page based on your choice, and then that would tell you what happened. There was no dice rolling or stats or items to keep track of. Eventually, they made Super Endless Quest, which was had some system. It was still much simpler than that of any tabletop role-playing game, but there was a certain amount of dice rolling. There was a certain amount of ability to change some of the details of your character. This is one of that series of the Super Endless Quest series. Although the series changed its name twice throughout its run, so it's a little bit confusing. It became, I think, Super Endless Quest AD&D Adventure Game Books, and then it just became AD&D Adventure Game Books. But anyway, this one is set in the Dragonlance setting. That was a setting that was used for both games and novels. The novels were, from memory, really popular at the time, but seem to have been largely forgotten. I don't know much about the Dragonlance setting, so I'm not able to say whether this game book, captures the atmosphere of that setting or not. So I'm just going to have to review it as as an object in itself. I'd be interested to know if anyone is a fan of Dragonlance, what they, how they feel about whether it captured that. Talking about the system, it is very simple. You have some hit points, which you roll dice to determine. You have 3 different skills, which you distribute points among. The main mechanic of the game is rolling a die and adding one of either perception or fighting, which is one of the 2 things you distribute points among. Sometimes you get to cast a spell, which lowers your spellcasting point by 1, and usually that is better than choosing to fight. Perhaps you get through automatically without having to roll, or perhaps the roll is easier. You can also use experience points, which is a phrase from Dungeons and Dragons, but it's used in a quite different way. In this game book, experience points are points that you can sacrifice to add to a roll before you make the roll. So they're kind of like luck points, perhaps, or hero points in different systems, but they're called experience points mainly, I think, because that's a phrase from D&D. Similarly, your life points are called hit points, which is the D&D. I mean, I know it's a almost universal term now, but D&D invented well, D&D got the term hit points from a game about a war game about battleships, actually, but they're the ones that popularized the idea that the points you have that represent how close you are to dying, and if they go to 0, you die. Calling those points hit points, that was D&D, and I think they really invented the idea of individuals having individual characters having hit points as well. But really, apart from that use of two words from D&D, it's really not D&D, which I think is good. I think that having even a simplified version of the D&D rules would be too much for what this is. It would be too much for a game book, really. In this game, you are a specific character. So it's not like Dungeons and Dragons where you make up a character, you name them, and then you choose whether they're going to be an elf or a dwarf or a human, and if so, are they going to be a wizard or a thief or whatever. No, you're a specific person. You're an elf, sort of prince, basically, and also you're super racist. And this is a main plot point. You have fallen in love with what you thought was another elf called Silvara, but actually she's not an elf at all. She is a dragon. She's a silver dragon, and I'll read you the what they say about this. Silvara is no elf maid. In her true form, she is a silver dragon. As an elf, it is difficult for you to reconcile even relationships between humans and elves, and the gulf between elf and dragon is many times as wide. Even thinking of Silvara brings you great pain, and you have vowed never to see her again, but instead to throw your entire being into the war against the evil forces defiling your world. Except for racism, you're fine with that particular evil force. This takes place in a setting in which racism is objectively correct as well, because there are evil races and good races. There are, in fact, evil dragons and good dragons. And the difference is that the good dragons are named after metals, and I think look like metals. So gold, silver, copper, I think maybe bronze dragons, they're the good ones, and evil dragons are named after and look like colours. So if there's a red dragon and a green dragon and a blue dragon, they're all evil. And there are a couple of points in the story where you see, oh, the people on that ship are minotaurs, and all minotaurs are pirates, so therefore that's a pirate ship. And you say that and you think that, and it turns out to be correct. So this is a world in which racism is just objectively true. But even for that, you're a racist, because the gold dragons are good dragons. They're objectively good. They're objectively on the right side. But apparently sexual relations with them is upsets you. And it's never explained. It's not explained why. He certainly doesn't say that there's anything wrong with elvish culture that has made you have this view. It's sort of implied that this is a quite normal and acceptable thing for an elf to think. And it may be that it was addressed at some point that I didn't get to. It may be that it was addressed at some point elsewhere in the Dragonlance series, because for all I know, these people might be major characters in the Dragonlance series. Perhaps he learns a lesson in the end. But in this game book, you are a racist, and that's causing you enormous stress because you are in love with a member of this other race or species, but you feel that it would be wrong to have, it doesn't say sexual relations, this is aimed at kids, but that's really what's happening. And that's a problem, and it's sad, but it's not really suggested that it's wrong. It's not really suggested there's anything wrong with you. In fact, you are objectively on the side of good, and it says that, the forces of good, against objectively the forces of evil. And you might say, well, it's a kid's book, but that's a terrible thing to teach kids, isn't it? Anyway, whatever. I don't think it, I mean, it probably didn't do a lot of harm. I don't think many people grew up to be racists because they read Dragonlance, but it's, it's not great. It doesn't sit well. The cover art is by Larry Elmore, the same guy that did the cover art to one of the Car Wars game books that I have reviewed previously. This one looks like what I think of as a Larry Elmore painting. Larry Elmore is he did lots and lots of paintings for Dungeons and Dragons in the era when they were, in the 80s, in the era of their greatest popularity. He's technically a very good painter, I think. Everything looks like what it's meant to be. The perspective's always right. It's quite sort of evocative. It has there's a weird convention that a lot of the women dress like they're on their way to their job at the strip club. A lot of the women are very scantily clad. Often it seems like maybe they're doing a sort of Native American themed striptease because they've got sort of feathers in their hair. And this doesn't really fit with the content because this particular game book, and certainly the other content for which Larry Elmore was providing these paintings, is very kid friendly. This was the era when Dungeons and Dragons really wanted to move away from its sort of dope smoking college kid origins, maybe. I mean, not that they were dope smoking college kids who made it, but its first audience were probably college kids. They liked Conan. There's adult content in Conan, I suppose, and they didn't want that. They felt that there was a lot more money to be made selling to children. They wanted to make everything very kid friendly. So you have these very kid friendly adventures with sort of lovable absent-minded wizards. There's a lovable absent-minded wizard in this, by the way. But then there's a Larry Elmore illustration, and there's just these Hooters waitresses just kind of walking around, and she's like, no, she's the queen of this kingdom or something. And it really, it's weird. It's odd, or it's incongruous. The pictures are, very good, but it's like, he's not illustrating the thing that you're being told about, I guess. In Conan, often the women are scantily clad, right? Often it's specifically said. The priestess, is wearing a diaphanous, I don't think Robert E. Howard ever said diaphanous, but it's specifically said, yeah, this is a sexy, scantily clad woman. And Conan looks at her and feels sexual desire for her, and that's often a big part of the plot. Conan wants to rescue, wants this girl to go with him. He calls them girl a lot, I think, from memory. And perhaps these female characters sort of use their sexiness as to kind of manipulate men and so on. But that's not really happening in 80s Dungeons and Dragons. It's very chaste. People fall in love and marry, I suppose. But it's not sort of sexual. So it has a cover. You should be looking at a picture of a section of the cover with one of the Larry Elmore women of which I speak. It's a good painting, but it's weird. It's weird that these were for 10-year-olds. I don't know. I like Larry Elmore's artwork, but it's incongruous to me. Anyway. This is quite short compared to Fighting Fantasy, which is always the sort of, I don't know, that's always my go-to because that was the big series when I was growing up in Australia. They tend to have 400 paragraphs. This has 218 paragraphs. It's quite wordy, like the paragraphs are quite long. The person who wrote it obviously thought, my job is to tell a story. It's not just to describe the choices that the player has. It's to tell a story. So I have to say what the city looks like and how the character feels at this point, and and every so often there'll be a choice. It's more like that. It's a story that occasionally has choices. Whereas another option that you can do, and the one that I tend to do, and the one that I perhaps tend to enjoy more, is if the there is as little text as possible to convey what's happening and what the choice is that you have. And that's not what they did. I'm not saying that's objectively a bad choice. I mean, I don't know if it even was a choice. The person who wrote it might have been told, we need this many, often this sort of thing. You're not going to just write what you want. You'll be told, we needs to be 40,000 words long, or whatever it may be. It needs to be this many thousand words long, and it needs to have this many, choices, and etc., etc. But I think I said 218 paragraphs. They're not. I keep calling them paragraphs. They're not paragraphs. They're sections. The numbers go up to 218. That's what I mean. There are a couple of what I call false choices. And an example of a false choice is when you say, "Do you want to take the bus?" Or not when you say, when a game book says, "Do you want to take the bus or do you want to get a taxi?" Or I'll choose to get a taxi. You try and get a taxi, but there's no taxi, so you take the bus. Go to the paragraph that you would have gone to if you'd chosen to take the bus. Again, I said paragraph. What was the point of that, right? Why give the person the choice and then go, yeah, no, actually you decide to do the other thing? It's a pet hate, and it happens at least once, and I think twice in this book, and I don't like it. Perhaps I dislike it more than it objectively deserves. I think I probably do, but yeah, I did notice that and I didn't like it. As I say, there's a sort of senile wizard, but it's kind of played for laughs. He's absent-minded, but he's an old wizard, right? He's an old wizard and he's forgetful and his spells go wrong, and it kind of seems like he has dementia, actually, but it's not played. He's comic relief, right? It's not like, oh God, what are we going to do? Because actually, obviously dealing with a person with dementia is horrible, but dealing with a person with dementia who has enormous magical power would be horrible, and extra horrible because they can kill you with a word, but that's not really gone into. It's just, no, it's a funny wizard. It's fine. And it's, it's fine, but it sort of made me think about, I guess what I took away from it was mostly like, yeah, like in a world where magic existed, in a world where an individual can have significant magical power and dementia exists in that world, you'd have all of these old wizards who, what the hell are we going to do about this? Like, you'd have to kind of kill them, maybe, or, like there'd be enormous problems. It'd be like having someone walking around with a gun or with a nuclear bomb that you can't take off them. It's sort of inherent to them. What do you do? Do you just poison them? Perhaps. Anyway, that's nothing in the book. That's just what I took from the book. I do have a little bit of a problem with going into a volcano-filled evil kingdom. Lords of Doom is named after these three volcanoes, I think, and collectively they're called the Lords of Doom. And like, I've read Lord of the Rings, you know what I mean? I know about the evil kingdom that's full of, well, I don't know if it really is full of volcanoes in the book because I can't remember that, but certainly in every artistic depiction I've seen of Mordor, it's full of volcanoes spewing ash into the sky. Guy, like we've all read Lord of the Rings, it's like you can't really have a bunch of short guys that are like sort of rural English people and sort of have that as a plot element that you've made up. That's hobbits, you know what I mean? And a volcano-filled evil kingdom, that's Mordor. I mean, it's sort of dragon themed. It's evil dragon themed, but still, I mean, what you could say, what do you expect from Dungeons and Dragons, which is and should be a pastiche of all of the fantasy that you like? Yeah, sure. I think someone described it. I heard someone describe Dungeons and Dragons as I'm Conan, you're I'm Conan, you're Merlin. I'm Conan, you're Gandalf, and we team up to fight Dracula, right? In other words, it's meant to be a pastiche of elements from existing from other, from other sources. It's meant to allow you to play Jack Sparrow. It's meant to allow you to play, although of course Jack Sparrow was far later than when D&D was invented, but no, because Dragonlance was a sort of attempt at having a world that an individual made and that was new. And yes, it had elves and dwarves, but it was meant to be a new world. So I feel like, a modicum of it felt like a thing that perhaps I'd seen before. It was a bit too tropey. But like if they'd gone the other way and combined lots of tropes, like if they said, okay, you're basically Indiana Jones, and you and your companion, who's basically Gandalf, and your other companion, who's basically a ninja, have to go to what's basically Mordor, which is ruled by basically Hal from 2001. I would be definitely down with that. But that's not what this is trying to do. That's not what Dragonlance is trying to do. Dragonlance is trying to be its own thing within the sort of tradition of basically epic fantasy, I think. But I thought this was sailing a bit close to Lord of the Rings. But that is not my main complaint about this game. Sorry, I don't think I finished talking about the what I thought about the game system. I described the game system, and I didn't say whether I liked it or disliked it. I liked it. I think the game system is good. I think trying to simulate Dungeons and Dragons would have not worked. It would have been far too difficult, far too complex. And this is a nice... it gives me a bit of... there's a bit of choice about what my character has, what my character's skills are to start with. Maybe a little bit more choice would have been better, but still, it's good. And there's a little bit of dice manipulation. Before the roll, I can sacrifice XP if I feel like, this roll's probably going to be quite important. That's good. I like it. I don't have any problems with the system. I think it's just right for me anyway. But going back to my main complaint, which is that there's a misprint, and it's quite a big misprint. The misprint is at the end, unfortunately, which I think makes it worse, because I actually played twice. I died once, and on the second run through, I'll try and say this spoiler free. We're sort of at the final. It was giving the impression that we're at the final conflict, the final act, or the final scene is about to take place. You have two choices, and if you take the choice that I took, you get to a certain point, and the paragraph ends, and there are no instructions as to where to go. And it's not the end of the story. It doesn't seem to be the end of the story. You get to almost the end, and it just ends. And it's not that you have to read to the next paragraph. I did think... I keep saying paragraph, I'm sorry. I'm not going to stop doing it, I can't. Section. Just when I say paragraph, I mean section. And it's not that... I thought, maybe it's that you have to read on to the next paragraph. No, it's not. So... it just ends. I could have looked through the book and sort of worked out where you were meant to go, but I didn't want to. I was a bit peeved, actually. And it's sort of especially bad because it's at the end, because you've gotten through the whole thing, or it seems to be near the end anyway. You've gotten through the whole thing, and it just ends. Not good. I think I would... If I played it again, I would probably either just do the other choice, or I would look through to see where you were meant to go. I did have a look online for errata. Gamebooks.org often has errata, has misprints, misnumbering, or like in this, lack of numbering, and tells you what it should say. But I couldn't find anything. There may be some, but I can't find it. And that is really bad. You shouldn't put something out that you haven't play tested thoroughly, and they obviously didn't play test it thoroughly. The rest of it seemed fine. There weren't spelling mistakes or anything. There was only this one mistake, but that's a big mistake, and that's really, obviously that's kind of let down the book. I might, you know, I might play other games in this series, but you know, I hope they don't do that again, because that's really bad. Anyway, that's the game book. That's most of what I have to say. I don't know. I think a big part of this game would. I think a big part of this, the appeal of this game would probably be knowing Dragonlance and going, oh, this fills in. I'm told that this fills in a little missing part of the plot of Dragonlance. I read online. And like, I remember when I reviewed the Narnia book, I feel like a lot of what I got out of that was knowing the books and having read Narnia. So I, having not read Dragonlance, can't say, does it capture the flavour? What is the flavour of Dragonlance? And if does it capture that? Does it make you go, oh, that how lovely? I remember reading this in much the same way as the Narnia book did for me. Or is it, you know, does it not capture it? And that's irritating, even though the game book itself might be fine. Unfortunately, I'm not in a position to tell you. If anyone has read Dragonlance and read this book, please let me know in the comments. But that is Advanced Dungeons and Dragons Adventure Game Book number 10, Lords of Doom. I hope that was useful or interesting to at least some of you, and I hope you will tune in next time.